Okay, it's 2 o'clock and it's time to start. So welcome all. I'm Katriina Soini from Natural Resources Institute, LUKE, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this seminar, Viikki Sustainability Research Seminar, organized by Finnish Environment Institute, LUKE, Natural Resources Institute, and Helsinki Institute of Sustainability Science. And as you may know, this seminar series has been running already for many years. And today we have decided to discuss economics in sustainability transitions. And I'm sure that you are more or less familiar with all these diverse representations of sustainability where economical dimension is represented in diverse ways. There is this 3-pillar approach where the different dimensions are considered as necessary conditions for sustainability but still separate. Then we have this Venn diagram where we have these 3 dimensions interconnected, and we may think that all these issues will be achieved and we can find win-win solutions, and this is often called weak sustainability, while then strong sustainability establishes a kind of hierarchy between these dimensions and places the environment most important, and then we also have a kind of Mickey Mouse representation where we think that the economic dimension is often stressed too much and the others needs to be adapted to that. So this discussion has been going on many decades, so to say, how this economy should be represented. And for me, it's quite strange that often the academic research does not actually pay that much attention into the economic dimension, while the environment and social has been more discussed how they are as dimensions and so on. Although, of course, there has been this strong criticism towards economic growth in the society as a whole. But then in sustainability science especially, and the most recent sustainable research has taken this donut economy as a kind of representation for sustainability. And here I think that the novelty is that now it's no longer, economy is no longer just the one pillar, but it's in between the ecological ceiling and the social foundation. So I think that this highlights the importance of the economy as a means in many ways to achieve the targets and within the safe and just space for humanity. And besides this donor model, there are many other new concepts and approaches that are trying to find alternative ways to look at the economic dimension of sustainability, besides these disciplines that have already institutionalized looking at the economical aspects in sustainability. And today we will have 3 presentations that look at the economic dimension on economics in sustainability from diverse perspectives. And the 3 speakers coming from 3 institutes that are behind this research seminar, and Eva Primmer, research director from Syke, will lead the discussion or these presentations. And after that, we will have a time for group discussion that will be chaired by Riikka Paloniemi, and then we will conclude by the seminar by Tiina Johansson-Helsos. So with these words and the program, I will welcome you once again, and then we'll leave the floor to Eva Primmer to present the speakers of today. Thank you.
Thank you hugely, Katriina. This was excellent start for the seminar. So we are like Katrina says, we have been running this for a long time, and we try to think of a timely topic. And now that we are, in a way, experiencing with the environment and sustainability topics being a little bit hidden behind very acute kind of economic competitiveness and also security issues, it's really good to look at economics and economy in an analytical fashion. And we have a really wonderful bunch of people here today talking about these topics and leading us to that. And then we will have the group discussion, like Katrina said. But first we will do so that also the presentations, I hope that they are so sort of concise that we could have questions and discussion also after each presentation. I hope you have planned them so. And so our speakers come Enni Ruokamo from Syke, Kati Lähtinen from Luke, and Michiru Nagatsu from University of Helsinki, Helsus. And I will first introduce and give the floor to Enni, who is a research professor in the Finnish Environment Institute, research professor on circular economy. I think it is economy and markets, so something like this with your research professor, but she only just started as a research professor, and she's been with us in Syke for a fair while. And Enni sits somewhere else in Syke, possibly in Jyväskylä, and that's where she's located, and that's why she comes to Viikki online. And with that, I give you the floor, Enni, and you can tell us about how environmental economics relate to sustainability. Please, Enni. I hope you can just capture the slide. Very good. We can see your slide, Enni.
Okay, so good afternoon to everybody on my behalf as well. So hopefully you are able to hear me, and I will now start my presentation.
We hear you well.
Yeah, okay. So I'm happy to be here today to talk about environmental economics and what kind of insight it could offer for sustainability transition research. And first, quickly, the content of my presentation. So in the beginning, I will quickly overview how economics typically approaches environment. And after that, I will move to two examples which illustrate how economics approaches can be used in sustainability transition research. So this is a little bit like a silly salatti, my presentation, but hopefully it makes sense in the end. But let's start. So I start my presentation with the same slide I typically start my lectures on the environmental economics course. And with this slide, I want to illustrate the underlying fact that our economic system and well-being are really dependent on the well-functioning biosphere and nature. And this fact is also highlighted in the Dasgupta review, which focuses on the connections between economy, economics, and the natural environment. More precisely, how the mainstream economics takes into account or sometimes ignores the natural capital. However, the message from the Dasgupta review is clear, and I agree with him, that without a healthy nature and biosphere, we cannot have a healthy economy in the long run. The economy is completely dependent on the resources and ecosystem services provided by the nature, and this dependency is pretty much a one-way street. But after this brief background, let's start to position economics on the environmental theme. So first, we recognize that natural capital, meaning our ecosystems, resources, and environmental services, they form a type of wealth, just like human or productive capital do. So natural capital is part of the overall capital base that the societies rely on. And traditionally, economics is about how we allocate scarce resources. And when the markets fail to allocate resources efficiently, we talk about market failure. And environmental problems are classic examples of this. They often arise from lack of clear property rights, from public goods like clean air or biodiversity, and from externalities such as emissions, where the true costs aren't reflected in market prices. But it's not only markets that can fail, also institutions can fail as well. So although the goals for mitigating climate change and biodiversity loss have been set globally and nationally, quite often the measures taken to achieve these goals are not sufficient. And because of these different aspects I just mentioned, environmental and natural resource economics focuses on understanding these failures and tries to find solutions. It looks at how we can manage natural capital more sustainably, how we can correct market failures, and how policy can align economic decisions with environmental sustainability. So overall, economics provides approaches to understand behavior of economic agents, such as firms and consumers, design effective and fair policies. It provides approaches to quantify costs and benefits related to measures, policies, and investments, as well as enables us to model broader system changes and effects related to such changes. But now I move on the first example. So in this study that I'm going to focus next, we have conducted a cost-benefit analysis related to introducing an environmental flow policy to hydropower operations at Kemijoki River, Finland. This case study focuses on Ossauskoski hydropower plant located between Tervola and Rovaniemi. And this research has been a joint effort with several co-authors that you can see on the slide. So in today's presentation, I'm going to focus on an environmental flow policy, which aims to mitigate the short-term regulation of hydropower, meaning hydropeaking, in the Kemijoki River, which causes these artificial flow patterns involving high variability in water level as well as in flow. So while this hydropeaking in hydropower operation is good for providing balancing power to the power system and for decarbonization initiatives, it actually causes clear environmental effects in the river environment and also impacts the ecosystem services such as recreation related to the river. And as these negative local side effects are not typically taken into account in the river regulation policies, this paper aims to figure out the costs and benefits of possible environmental flow policy, which tries to restrict hydropeaking. But let's have a look on the approach we used in our paper. So to understand the costs related to introducing this kind of environmental flow policy, focusing on mitigating hydropeaking, in the paper we analyzed how hydropower plant allocates its production between day-ahead market and balancing market in the Nordic power market. And to do this, my colleague built a numerical optimization model and run it under two scenarios. under this business as usual scenario with typical hydropower operation causing significant hydropeaking, and under an alternative scenario with a moderate environmental flow policy where we have had set some minimum flow requirements related to the hydropower operations. This analysis then produced how this introduced environmental flow policy changed the hydropower revenues and system balancing costs. We also examined in this paper the environmental impacts with hydrodynamic model, but due to time restrictions, I'm not going to focus on this part. However, I will tell a little bit how we assessed the monetary value of environmental improvement related to the introduction of this environmental flow policy. Actually, we estimated willingness to pay for ecological and recreational benefits in another study, and then used these values in this cost-benefit analysis study to do the comparison between the economic costs and benefits. So, as I just said, the monetary value for the benefits associated with the environmental flow policy originate from a separate environmental valuation study published in 2024. And this valuation study addressed the willingness to pay for environmental flow policy, causing improvements in recreational use, ecological state of the river, and fish stocks in the Kemijoki watershed area. And this study used a choice experiment method and a survey to get understanding on whether and how much people were willing to pay for such changes in the watershed area. And in this valuation study, the first policy scenario resulted in positive willingness to pay, meaning that for the moderate environmental flow scenario, we got a positive welfare willingness to pay a little bit less than 70 euros per household. And in this case, we assumed that the balancing power services were provided with production that caused emissions, and thus the willingness to pay per household was a little bit less than in the second scenario, utilizing the same environmental flow policy, but assumed at the same time that there was no increase in emissions. So this alternative scenario yielded a little bit higher willingness to pay, over 90 euros per household, because here we assumed that the balancing services were provided with low emission solutions, such as batteries and demand side flexibility in the power system. And thus we got a little bit higher willingness to pay for this scenario. But let's move forward. And in this slide, I want to show how we calculated the societal welfare change for the environmental flow policy introduced to the Ossauskoski hydropower operations located in the Kemijoki River. So it combines three components. First of them is the hydropower plant's revenue losses. The second is the increase in the system balancing costs. And the third is the aggregate willingness to pay for the environmental benefits related to the environmental flow. And this aggregate willingness to pay is simply the scenario willingness to pay I showed in the previous slide, multiplied by the number of households living in the Kemijoki watershed area, and then multiplied with the share of the river length affected by this environmental flow policy in the Ossauskoski downstream area. But next we move to the results, and here we have them. So this slide presents the results of the cost-benefit analysis for the studied environmental flow, which is here called this MEFI. And we can see that there are costs related to the revenue losses of the hydropower operator, as well as costs related to system balancing. the negative numbers on the top rows, but there is also value related to the benefits of the environmental flow. And overall, we can see that on average, both scenarios results in both positive societal welfare. And actually, this is relatively significant if the lost hydropower is replaced by emissions-free solutions. So we can see that the second scenario results in a positive annual welfare change of nearly 140,000 euros on average, which demonstrates that the benefits clearly outweigh the costs related to this environmental flow policy. So overall, this study shows that trade-off exists if we introduce these kind of environmental flow policies on hydropower. However, the study also demonstrates that some loss of market revenue for power producers can result in significant non-market benefits for the river environment. And therefore, we show that this environmental flow policy can be socially desirable. And with this study, we hope to help policymakers, environmental regulators, and hydropower companies to understand the nuanced impacts of hydropower production and plan policies for more sustainable hydropower operations. But now we move to a totally different topic and example. And this study focuses on analyzing the circular economy transition in Finland, carried out with a large multidisciplinary research group, of whose names are mentioned on the slide. And in today's presentation, I will briefly introduce the scenario analysis work conducted in this project, which aimed to examine whether the use of natural resources can be decoupled from economic growth in the Finnish economy. But first, as a motivation, let's have a look why natural resource use and circular economy are so relevant for Finland. So Finland consumes significantly more natural resources than EU countries on average. In fact, the material footprint of Finns is more than three times the EU average, and the value added generated from Finland's natural resources is at the same time among the lowest in Europe. So the sustainable future therefore requires a significant rationalization of natural resource use in Finland, as well as a transition to circular economy principles. But then a few words about the conducted scenario analysis and the economics approach we used in this study. So the goal of this analysis was to forecast Finland's natural resource use up to 2035 and assess what actions would be needed to reach the circular economy goal to keep the natural resource use below 2015 level in the Finnish economy. As typically, the economic growth in Finland has also meant that the use of natural resources has been increasing. The scenarios were modeled with this EnviMatsken model, which is an environmentally extended simulation model of the Finnish economy. And this scenario analysis then provided insights on gross-domestic product and employment development. It gave understanding on material flows and other environmental impacts, such as greenhouse gases and biodiversity loss. And the scenario analysis allowed us to compare the changes over time from 2050 until 2035, and to compare how the economic and environmental impacts differ across various circular economy-related scenarios. In the scenario analysis, we used 3 scenarios that were built and modeled. And these scenarios were actually constructed in close collaboration between several research organizations and stakeholders such as companies, industry representatives, municipalities, and ministries. Then few words about the scenarios. So the baseline scenario assumed that the clean energy transition was completed and that some circular economy measures had been taken by the firms and consumers. Then in the circular economy scenario, more circular economy measures were introduced, such as more efficient use of materials in the forest and technology industries. And whereas in the carbon neutrality scenario, even more new and enhanced circular economy and climate measures were introduced into the analysis. And here, for example, strengthening the carbon sinks was one important area of measures. And to give some insights on the modeled circular economy actions and measures, they covered multiple and varying actions which were assumed to be implemented in different industries, in construction, in consumption, in food system and energy sector. And on the right-hand side, you can see some examples that were introduced into these scenarios. But now we move on the results of the scenario work. So the scenario analysis revealed that the transition to circular economy society actually can be achieved without weakening the economy. And at the same time, the consumption of natural resources can be kept under 2015 levels by 2035. Meanwhile, we can also achieve significant reductions in the greenhouse gas emissions and also a minor reduction in biodiversity loss. The scenario analysis also illustrates that in this kind of carbon neutral circular economy, this economic well-being can increase and be coupled with environmental impacts getting lower. But then a few words about how does the Finnish economy then look like after this transition to carbon neutral circular economy. So here are a few points that also are inside of these scenarios. So the gross domestic product will increase and labor productivity will strengthen as companies generate more value through improved material efficiency and by using recycled materials instead of virgin natural resources. In addition, production and consumption become much more service driven, which then changes labor allocation and reduces the share of capital, like this production and natural in the gross domestic product formation. And this improved material efficiency and growing share of domestic energy also reduces the Finnish economy's reliance on imported goods. And finally, there is also significant export potential for the equipment and services needed to support this circular economy transition. And to conclude my presentation, this scenario analysis quantified the scale of circular economy actions needed to halt the growth in natural resource use in the Finnish economy. The good news is that decoupling seems to be possible, meaning that this transition to a low carbon circular economy can happen without sacrificing economic growth. But of course, there will be winners and losers in the economy between and within industries, which of course then highlights need for careful planning in this transition. The analysis also it underlined the importance of clean energy system in the circular economy transition, as well as the circular economy's role in achieving carbon neutrality. So they go in a way hand in hand. And overall, the analyzed CE transition scenarios, they really require these kind of systemic changes across all industries as well as in consumption. And this calls for changes in policy and regulation. However, this scenario work also shows that despite this systemic change, the material footprint per capita in Finland is still expected to remain at quite high level. And one can, of course, ask whether this kind of transition is big enough. But here are some references, and thank you.
Thank you, Enni. Thanks a lot, and this was a really sort of practical introduction to how environmental economics contributes to analyzing sustainability. And it would be nice to have a discussion, but actually now I think it's good to go forward and take all our presentations. But Enni, you will be online, right? So that if there are questions to you, then we can you can answer if they are straightforward questions, and if they are more complex, then we can address them in the later discussions. And with that, I would next invite Katja Lähtinen, who is a professor or research professor at Luke, and she will talk more from a business economics perspective about how to address sustainability. Please, Katja, you have the floor.
Thank you, Eva. So, yeah, I assume I need help from you. Yes. Making this presentation. No, it looks. Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much, and thank you for the possibility to give here a presentation from the perspective of business economics. Yes, when I was asked about the title, and I started to think that, okay, what has been the kinds of issues and approaches that I've been working with, and also with my colleagues, so trying to combine. Well, first in this presentation I will talk maybe generally about business economics and maybe the views that connect with economics, but also what are specialties when coming to business economics level, and also then going a bit of through a case of industrial wood construction, what does those issues mean. So, what already said that sustainability may be defined in many ways, and when talking about business economics, the situation is the same. I won't start going in detail this all issues which are here, but maybe saying that from one perspective there is corporate responsibility and also these other viewpoints. And maybe saying that from the perspective of business economics, and when it comes to companies, if thinking about the sustainability and sustainable operations of companies, environmental and social aspects are critical and critically important. But there is also the economic layer, which is very important for companies, because if any company is going to sustain in the business, in a longer period of time, it must be economically sustainable. And that is also the way to secure employment, which relates to social sustainability, but also to take care of the other responsibilities which relate to environmental sustainability. So there one could say that for a business there is this balance quite strongly, that there are these three pillars of sustainable that exist. And since there isn't so much of time, I guess you've seen that, so I won't go in detail in these, because these are obvious. I must just check that there is one slide, actually. It seems that it might be missing over here. Yes, there is, but let's not stuck in that. Well, one important thing is that what's said about this sustainability. So from the perspective of businesses, it can be considered as a triangle. One part is suppliers. So one could say the businesses, which are supplying the products and services to the markets. Another part is customers, which may be business customers or consumers. They purchase the products and services. And the third part is governance, which relates to EU policies, for example, but also national regulations and local decisions, for example, made in municipalities. So I made a note related to what Enni said in her presentation, that systemic changes, that it is needed changes made by actors in every industry and consumption, and also requires changes in policy. So these are exactly the same thing when looking from the perspective of businesses. And in my presentation, I will go through that, because we are talking about the actors. So one can think that there are actors in all of this. Even though we talk about governance, we talk about companies, or we talk about customers, there are always stakeholders and actors, and even professionals are individuals who make the decisions. So it's combining the views of organizations, but also how do we as experts or professionals make decisions based on what we expect or value. And one important part is that we talk about value creation and what is valuable for anyone, is that, okay, value may be something, and is something measured with monetary values when it comes to, for example, financial statements, but it's also something which not necessarily possible to measure in a way that there are these intangible issues related to that. So when it comes to, well, who's stakeholder, who is actor? Well, this relates to stakeholder theory, which may be quite familiar for many of you. So stakeholders, they are the groups who influence or are being influenced by the actions of a particular organization. The organization may be a business organization, but nowadays, for example, a stakeholder theory is much more related also to public organizations, that also we, for example, the organizations we are representing have our own stakeholders with whom we are communicating and should be communicating. And in this context, actors are those stakeholders who influence those organizations, including businesses. So when talking about the systemic transition, so there are these roles of actors in supply, demand, and governance, and actually now there is this slide which I thought that I have lost at some point. So this is the circle. I won't go in detail anymore that, but one can see that, okay, supply, demand, governance, and there is circle either or this way, but also can be other way, and all parts are needed. And that's why sustainability change or transition is very challenging, because you can't change only one piece of the puzzle. It's connect also to the others. And then, yes, but what is perceived value? And well, companies, it's one thing that also it's maybe one could say as a difference to economy. A difference with business economics is that, well, First of all, if thinking one company, for example, that the company seeks for competitiveness in their markets, there is one important thing is resource efficiency. So to basically, well, it's cost efficiency. Another part is value creation, which affects income. Basically quite simple in such a way. And if talking about which company is competitiveness, one can say that a company is competitive in its industry if it performs better than the industry average. So basically there is no one measure, but it can be chosen. There is no one definition for competitiveness in such a way. But important part is if thinking about the companies that stay in the markets, and this concerns no matter we talk about sustainability transition or markets in general. So it must be competitive in short term and in long term. So it means that even though we are talking quite a lot, and it's important, I emphasize that, I don't disagree, we talk about value creation. But if thinking about the income that comes, for example, if increasing income with value, that is based basically on income statement. And that's one important part is the cost structure. And in order to create value, that requires investments. And that relates to balance sheet. So companies must make investments, and in a long term, they also, in the course of time, they cause costs. So value as such is not enough, an income, but there are also including taxes. That is one part. So if company is doing well, it gets income, but it also must take care of its other responsibilities in the society. So it's a combining also profitability measures, turnover growth, value creation, and different types of measures. And to be competitive, it's a question about not only adapting in the business environment, but also foreseeing what's going to happen. And important part when it comes to sustainability change, especially is that knowing that, okay, what to invest in, but also what to divest in. Something must be changed.
It's not about.
Good. If someone was sleeping, at least it was the waking up. Well, there is a old figure, I won't go in detail, but one can see that any firm, there are resources, capabilities, and their strategies. They try to compete in the business environment, and they try to react in the business opportunity, in the business environment circumstances by reacting, but also foreseeing, and they receive information from the business environment. And there are different types of processes. There are products and services. There are monetary flows, but also information flow. So basically, in business economics, this is the simple way of describing what's ongoing. So, and then maybe there is more about psychological issues. I'm not at all a specialist of that area, but that's very interesting for me because we also in business economics, but also in other contexts, we talk about value creation. And one important part is to understand what is value. What do we mean by? Okay, there may be some values which are somehow built-in values that they are valuable for their own sake. Like, for example, natural environment. But there are also different types of benefits that the kinds of values we achieve. And those values, like already said, they affect how do we, as professionals, for example, make decisions related to as enablers for sustainability transition. So, and also the hindrances that exist. And for example, there are prejudices that are not, even though someone gives good motivations and there are grounded reasons why some systemic change should be made, but there are also prejudices which are based on the fact that there is no information nor interest some actors to promote. the decisions. And for example, if thinking about how could we maybe manage this situation is that when it comes to, for example, wood construction, we can see that there have been huge hopes for the increase in multi-story wood building in Finland and also in other countries. And in Finland, it has been challenging. And one important part is that it has been quite often thought as a question of seeking for cost efficiency, for example, or that there are some benefits for as living environments, for example. But this is let's hope that we will publish this article someday. But these are results based on, I won't go them in detail over here, but actually, if looking at the existing research results, there are many benefits that relate, for example, to environmental aspects through resource efficiency, for example, which reflects in cost efficiency, for example, but also there are other possibilities, and they relate to different life cycle aspects. But what is important is that when talking about circular economy, for example, even though these are findings of summarizing international research results, we can see that from the perspective of circular economy, this reuse of materials and demolition of buildings, in a way, the last life cycle phase, there is very little of information on that. It is still based on quite much on linear economy, that how things maybe the benefits, for example. So there is a research gap. And one important thing when looking at the actors is that we can see that there are lots of actors involved when looking at what's happening in the industrial wood construction. We can see that we can think that business networks are composed of those actors who are really in building and supplying the buildings. And then there are business ecosystems where there are other organizations and individuals, for example, through governance, for example, land zoning, municipalities, or as consumers or businesses buy apartments, for example. And so there are many actors related to that, and what is now at the moment from the perspective of business economics known that lots of research results exist on how maybe the supply should be developed in terms of technologies or production processes or these types of things. But like already said, end of life phases are not so well known, but also when it comes to benefits at the usage phase, who benefits and how do the costs and benefits also measured with monetary terms, to whom do they accrue? So that is very important, and that also relates what the whole economy, of course, because they connect with those. So if thinking that wood construction would be a kind of a one thing related to sustainable building and housing, and systemic sustainability change in that area, one can see that there are lots of, for example, these are based on our project's research results, that there are many aspects which relate both to supply structures, governance, but also the consumers and those dwellers in the houses. So we know, for example, there is a need to new capability building and to see how the construction processes should be changed. That's one thing. One thing is that looking from the value chains, there are gaps in the information how the companies may be profitable in the whole value chain. So there are gaps. So in order to businesses to stay in business, I mean, to do that. But also that consumers, for example, there are lots of things that benefits are let's say, that consumers necessarily do not know so much. So that's one thing. But there are also, I assume that these will be later available, these presentations. So there are also citations for the studies. But maybe as a summary, these things do not concern only wood construction. So research is needed in general on how the actors are being motivated, understanding why yes, why someone is positive towards something, but also why no. And very important is also to know why some actors are hesitate something, because they may change their opinions quite quickly, and they may not. It's possible that they are not doing their decisions over, based on rational consideration. That's one thing. And also those who have the power. One thing is, like said already, prejudices, but professional, and what is important, not only private people or consumers do have prejudices, but also experts. We all know that we have all our own values and they affect us. And one thing is that how do, in a longer term, these different aspects of business economics which relate to different constituents, how do they affect, and let's say, how do they cause risks for changing the businesses? Because the companies related to companies who are supplying the services and products, they must stay in business in order to also to provide the solutions in a longer term. So maybe that. Thank you. And there are two projects of which the other one has ended, but the other one is still ongoing. So.
Huge thanks, Katja. We actually have time for a question, so don't go.
Yes, no,
yeah, thanks. This connects really nicely to Enni's presentation that was more at the kind of like when it was at the national economy level, then you don't go behind what sort of builds the willingness to pay, or like that. Yours connected really nicely. So would there be a question to Katja? Yes, please. And no, you need a mic for hearing. Riikka has this other type of mic.
How do you see the role of investors as actors, the ones who own the companies, lend money to companies in the picture?
Investors, of course, that they are really important. And also one important part is that there has been the discussion that it is also a motivation if you think about the so-called, in a way, pre-funding and requiring also. So that can be also, and also motivating that maybe, for example, loans would be less expensive for those actors who are really doing some sustainability action. So that, of course, finance is in many ways a key. Mm-hmm. Both investors, but also for those who are, for example, buying apartments. Mm-hmm.
Super good. And we can continue the discussion after. Thank you, Katja.
Thank you.
And I really like the prejudices way of thinking about rigidities in the economy and the sort of business as usual assumption. But you also talked a lot about value creation. So that's a nice bridge to Michiko's presentation on facts and values and degrowth ideas in sustainability transition. So please, Michiko, you have the floor, and I hope there's the technical support for you.
It's my technical support.
And Michiru.
Well, it can go either way. I can also be a Mikko. So where's the microphone? Is it?
The microphone.
This one. This one.
Yeah.
All right.
Good.
So I should rather stick to this table. See, that case. Yes.
The table also because then your picture is in the online.
Where's the camera?
It's in the yellow. Oh, sorry.
This one.
Black computer.
Okay.
We can even turn it around.
Yes. So I'm bound. Yes. So okay. So maybe is this in a PDF? Maybe I wanna, can I do? Yeah, maybe this is better. Do you see it? Very good. So let's do this minimum, and then there will be a bit of a scary noise, but please allow me. I'm taking my own time. And so I try to be brief, maybe two. So I try to be like within 20 minutes, ideally. I guess I have 25 minutes, right? So if I'm lucky, I will stay in 15 minutes and we can discuss for 10 minutes. But so today's title is Facts and Values in Degrowth Economics. I'm not an economist. I'm a philosopher of economics, but that's a kind of very specific niche profession. I guess I just failed in economics, and then I keep taking, I don't know, retake of exams. So I feel like that's a sort of a karma of my academic life that you cannot escape from retake. That's sort of how you see yourself. Okay, so this is the outline. So this is partly based on a draft that I wrote with my colleague Miles MacLeod. So it's under review in the European Journal for Philosophy of Science. Hopefully get accepted. So there are 4 parts, actually 3, first 3. And I will be really brief with the philosophy of science part and spend much of the time on the second part. And then we briefly talk about approaches to value management in science, and then we can discuss a little. So philosophy of science, so because how many of you are philosophers of science? No one. So you can, you're a philosopher. So just to summarize what's state of the art in the literature or the field, philosophers of science agree that scientific research is value-laden as a matter of fact. So, which means that they are not value neutral. And that's a sort of a standard, well-received view. So if you talk to a mainstream philosophy of science academics, they all say, yes, science is value-laden. And what that means is a bit more complicated, but let's stop here. And then they also agree that the values should not predetermine the conclusions in advance. So wishful thinking, dogmatism, these things are very bad for science. Everyone agrees on that. And in other words, hypothesis testing or theory testing has to be fair to rival hypotheses or rival theories, and it also has to be severe to its own experimental or empirical test. So that's what that much is agreed. So it's theory-laden, but we have to be methodologically rigorous in those ways. But they disagree on how exactly this so-called non-epistemic values. It's not about accuracy of descriptions or simplicity of theories. Those are so-called epistemic values, but everything else is categorized as a non-epistemic values. So they disagree on how exactly those non-epistemic values can play a legitimate roles in research. And sort of mainstream view is that they can instrumentally work in science. Why instrumental? So because those non-epistemic values are just instruments or means to achieve an end, which is better science. And in this context, the better science is kind of conceived as a better knowledge. So if the different types of values contribute to the better knowledge, then that's okay. So, but only to that extent. So for example, feminist epistemology or feminist science, the feminist values are non-epistemic values, but those values are accepted in science as long as the outcome science is a better science. So that's a kind of instrumental way of accepting non-epistemic values in science. And in social epistemology, there's a lot of discussions about why diversity is important, because by putting different types of values, you get less biases and better science. So that's a more instrumental way of thinking about values. But there's a more holistic or radical way of thinking about values, because facts and values are entangled more in complicated ways, and maybe science can also inform values as well. So the values can also change as a result of scientific research. So that's a sort of more holistic approach. So these are the two alternatives at the moment. But we don't really know much about how do values change. There was a bit of a discussion about values in the last presentations, but when you think about how the facts and values interact, we have studied a lot about how the how values influence scientific research. And then these are in terms of, you know, the biases and fruitfulness and all these things. But then there's a little studies, very few studies about how values get themselves, you know, updated or changed based on the facts. And there's also another worry. I just quote the Yap. Even if we grant that the value judgments are in principle revisable based on empirical evidence, they may be so deeply entrenched and tied to issues of identity and general social environment that they simply will not be what gives way in light of recalcitrant experience. The idea is that, you know, it's difficult to change values. Even if we accept that in principle they can change, it's not so easy. And is this true for scientists? And if that's the case, then how can we change this situation? And I look at this economy versus the environment debate among researchers as a kind of case study to think about these value change questions. And this is the longest part, but maybe as many of you know, there's this sort of a narratives on growth, economic growth, GDP growth, more specifically around the issue, the economy versus the environment. And there's a question, very important question, can economic growth and ecological degradation be decoupled? And in the first presentation, we saw some, you know, hopeful answer that it's possible in Finland. Is it happening? And then in a global scale, the yes answer comes from what I call the Rosling, Pinker, Ritchie, Rockstrom narrative. So this is named after Hans Rosling and Steven Pinker, Hannah Ritchie, and among all the others, Johan Rockstrom. And Johan Rockstrom is a bit of a surprise figure here, but he says in this popular book, Rockstrom and Gaffney, something like this: the planetary boundaries framework is entirely agnostic about the global economy. So they say that, okay, yes, we propose this thing, but our proposal is completely agnostic about the growth or degrowth debate. And in a few pages later, they say kids' economies are free to grow. And kids here means knowledge, information, digital service, shared economies. So including AI, I guess. So this is an interesting observation. So it's not necessarily coming from economics or economists, but non-economists, this part. And then the other answer is, of course, no. It's not possible to decouple this. And there's a biogeophysical metabolic bottom lines in this. And so people promote the idea of degrowth as a policy alternative. And then some people say, well, we will just collapse. So these are options. And so this might be the latest. Maybe it's 5 years old. It's 2020. There's a systematic review of evidence and evidence synthesis about the decoupling questions. And conclusion is that large, rapid, absolute reductions of resource use and greenhouse gas emissions cannot be achieved through observed decoupling rates. Hence, decoupling needs to be complemented by sufficiency-oriented strategies and strict enforcement of absolute reduction targets. So that's a sort of evidence synthesis, at least in this paper. And then some degrowth people, of course, refer to this outcome still in 25. So I will, so that's a sort of debate, and I won't further go into this because I'm not really competent in assessing this debate in this empirical model-based level. So I will look at people's opinions, and there's a really interesting review, the survey paper about scientists' view on exactly this question, and it was done in 2017. A bit before the publication of that kind of important synthesis paper. And the idea is that, this is another paper, more recent one published in Nature Sustainability in 2023. And you can see this opinion. So this green is believers of green growth, namely the decoupling is possible. And then degrowth people say decoupling is impossible, therefore we have to degrow the economy. And the blue people are agnostic. We don't know, but maybe it doesn't matter. And you can see the huge disciplinary differences here. So starting from economics, there's a 35% of the economists think that the green growth is possible, and then the degrowth people are very minority, but actually quite substantial, close to half of them are growth or growth kind of agnostic people. And engineers are worse, not worse, sorry, I shouldn't say worse, but engineers are even more optimistic. And then social scientists and the environmental social scientists are most sort of degrowth-oriented people. And then there's another contrast here, which is a very much like confirming the Yap's comment about the difficulty of changing positions. If you look at the non-OECD and the BRICS countries, the majority of the people are believing in green growth. But if you look at the European Union, OECD, North America, there's a bit less belief in that positions. So we are in this European Union, so you can see the sort of landscape. So that's an overview. It's still a small sample, 764, but it kind of shows some patterns. And another interesting thing is that in this previous survey that I mentioned by Drews and Van den Berg, the views on economic growth are relatively strongly affected by political ideology, even after controlling for field identities. So field identities we saw, but kind of a political ideology. How did they operationalize political ideology? It's very simple. It's a 7-Likert scale. If you're most right wing, you're 7, and if you're most left wing, you're 1. So it's a self-report of your political positions. And as you can see, everyone is like slightly like a leftist, because we are all in academia. But growth economics is 3.79, so it's relatively like a right wing. And then you can see this, I don't know, other economists, environmental economists, ecological economists, environmental social scientists, and environmental scientists. So environmental social scientists, again, the most kind of a leftist kind of academics. So this is, sorry, the left and right is the reversed in these representations, but you see the idea. And also, when you ask them questions, why do researchers' views on economic growth and the environment differ? And their answer is very simple, ideology. So they kind of know it. So the most popular answer is the disciplines and the research foresee and those things, the discipline-related answers. And then there's this ideology-related answer. So they, sorry, yes. Yeah. Yeah, but in this survey, it was operationalized in this kind of abstract question, or is the environment and the economy compatible, economic growth compatible with each other? And then yes and no. So that was kind of operation. Yes, so it's kind of hard to operationalize. I don't know. I have to check the exact questions. But here's a much more concrete operationalization. So this is what they did. The differences between the ideology and disciplines decrease when asked very concrete question about the compatibility of 2 degrees target and the global GDP growth based on the decoupling rate that exists. So evidence on insufficient absolute decoupling between GDP and emissions are already available in 2015, I think, when they did this survey. So they showed this to the respondents, and then the difference is decreased. So the idea is that if you ask concrete questions, then the most researchers agree that the two are incompatible. So do we think that this is an optimistic case, that if you show some evidence, people tend to agree? But it's not that easy, because if you look at this Dorman, who is an environmental economist, I don't know how prominent he is, but he sounds kind of prominent-ish. He wrote this interesting book, and in this section, he does exactly the same calculation as the surveys. So he sees that, okay, in order to keep it below 2 degrees, you need to have a 3.9% decrease of carbon emission per year for generations. So that's what we need. And then in order to do this, given the economic degrowth to emission reduction ratio, which is 0.64, we need to degrow economy by 2.5% every year for generations. And then he says, this is insane. It's not possible. Because in 2009, what we saw was, I don't know, 1% global, I don't know, GDP degrowth, and then it was a catastrophe. I mean, of course, it was a liquidity problems and stuff, so you cannot really simply compare. But you can see the scale of the degrowth that is required globally. But if you think about 2.5% year on year, so that's a real degrowth. And then he says that obviously carbon policy will have to be about what's in our economic pie and how we bake it, not the size of the pie per se. And that's kind of an interesting comment, because you say that, okay, there's evidence of insufficient decoupling, but then you run the calculation and then say that this level of degrowth is impossible. Therefore, some kind of a real absolute sufficient decoupling has to happen, which is the comment, right? So we have to, you know, we have to bake the pie in a better way. So it's not the size. So that's a sort of comment which sort of denies this ratio, saying like a better ratio is possible because degrowth is not possible. So that's a kind of interesting operation. So it seems like people who want to keep this growth or somewhat agnostic about growth tries to use this evidence of no tolerable degrowth. So the idea is that we have never witnessed 2.5% global economic degrowth for generations in our history. so that's the evidence. And they want to use this evidence to discount the second evidence, which is the evidence that we have never seen a sufficient decoupling. So degrowthers do the opposite. They use the second one to discount the third one, which means that the fact that we have never seen it doesn't mean that it's not possible. So both sides say the same thing. And then some economists discount the starting point, say that let's not worry because we don't know. There are too much. So this is a sort of merchants of doubt style approach to say that maybe we don't have to worry so much. Maybe it's not so bad. Because at least in the global north, it's better than the global south. So there's some kind of argument here. And then the doomsters, like myself, accept all three. And then they say, well, probably we will have a socio-ecological collapse. So that's sort of a kind of situations. And there are some examples of doomsday economists. So these people are interestingly not so-called ecological economists or post-growth economists, but they come from very mainstream, thank you, side. This one is coming from behavior economists, and this one is coming from business economists. And both of them conclude that, well, probably the trajectory is not so great. So if you want to, you know, I don't want to worry you so much. So if you are worried, you can also do the literature review. So there's always keep calm and review the literature. So there's this paper, which is a literature review of the societal collapse. So you can read this and calm yourself down. Anyways, so let's move on to the last section, which is different approaches to managing values in research. So that was just an example. Seems like there are ideological worldview value conflicts, and then we cannot really converge because of these value issues. And then one popular approach is so-called transdisciplinary research. Hey, let's put non-researchers into the picture, and then we can get this, you know, values from outside. Like users of science can give us real values. So be it politicians or so-called stakeholders can help us. But then in a technical context of maybe resource management of fisheries or those researches, this might work fine. But then for global sustainability programs, we are the stakeholders. So it's about our future. It's very difficult to sort of outsource the value questions. We have to make our own value judgments. And so this way, transdisciplinary research is not really a solution to the problem. So I will maybe stop here and then maybe just to show these questions that Tino shared with us, all three speakers. and I just didn't have any answers to some of the questions, but maybe to the first question, we can say that in the analysis of economics, maybe the fact that decoupling is unlikely can be taken more seriously. And then how does economic research support the sustainability transition? Maybe we have to change our values, but I didn't tell you how to do this. So this is a difficult open question. And then the last question, what it is like to be an economist in sustainability transition research? I'm not economist, luckily, so maybe economists in the room have to tell me. Thank you.
You also got the virtual applause. It's possible that everyone got them, and I just didn't see them on the screen. But anyhow, thank you. Thanks a lot. There is time for a question or two.
Nice question. There's one.
There's one.
Sampo
Pihlainen. So yeah, please, Sampo. We know that we will hear your voice very well.
Okay, very good. And hello, Michiru. Nice to see you. Thank you for the presentation, and I try to break the ice on trying to answer some of the questions on this slide regarding economics and sustainability transitions. I'm maybe starting with the second and the last bullet point, and next economist can take it from there. That how does economic research support the sustainability transition, and what it's like to be an economist in this research? Well, I myself study different kind of policy instruments, and that's in my view one answer to this second bullet point, and also a comment to this larger discussion regarding growth or degrowth. I have followed the discussion from bit afar, not delving deeply in there, and my view is somehow that, okay, I find the most important and interesting questions regarding sustainability transition and how economists can contribute there to be a bit separate from that juxtaposition of and focusing on the growth. I'm more interested in how can we, with economics and other social sciences, build such policy measures that really steer and motivate and incentivize people to do changes in their consuming or producing behavior so that we get into our environmental targets. And that may have some implications on the growth, but that is in a way a secondary question. And that's my 2 cents on this second bullet point. And on this last bullet point is like when I have this different kind of focus or emphasis on what I would like to do and what I think is important in doing economics, then this discussion on the growth seems to get a lot of attention, and I'm not sure where it's leading us. Maybe to the same kind of conclusions that I saw in some of the publications, that we do need more steering, and then that comes to the policy instruments. But I would start from there and focus on there, and that's only kind of my focus on my research. So that's of course what I bring up, but interested to hear your comments, and maybe also other economists can chime in. Thank you.
Excellent. Maybe did you want to Eva comment on exactly this same point or bring another point? Yeah. So we have Eva Heiskanen, and maybe you can actually walk here.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mr. for a great talk, and thanks for starting an interesting discussion about. I was also very interested to listen to these different viewpoints, and it might be interesting as like a modeling or like a research topic to also look at what kinds of economic reforms might be involved in these different positions. So it's a bit following on these policy instruments, but I'm not sure that the way we see policy instrument, the way we conventionally define policy instrument is perhaps sufficient, and one could examine other reforms. I have been just reading a paper on Central Bank of China, for example. So what if the government were to openly control the central bank and put in its mandate to shift the economy? Might these kinds of more deep-seated reforms, or what, something else like general basic income, more reforms that are more intruding into the logic of the economy itself, might these change the relationship between economy and natural resources?
No, let's do so that we address these two. They're quite complex questions.
Okay.
It will be to the,
Yes.
and then we can take the other speakers.
Sure,
comments
sure.
as
So
well.
my understanding, Sampo, is that you are like a growth. I think that's very close to Van den Berg's own position, because he promotes this idea of a growth. What you should do is just to do the right regulation. And then that leads to your question about the more deep-seated interventions. And of course, some people say, not necessarily like an old school communist proposal to demolish the private property, but more like nuanced ones. Like why don't we change the nature of money, or why don't we change the corporate limited liability system, which is sort of another way of saying that we should stop capitalism. But so there are those deep institutional kind of reform proposals, but the question is like who's going to initiate this? Because Finland cannot really do this. I mean, if you change corporate law and then all the Finnish companies become unlimited liability companies, then no one will take risks, and then we will degrow, which might be a good thing, but it's another valid question. So unless certain coordination at the international level can be made, it's really difficult to change the regulation. I mean, actually, it's also true for more traditional microeconomic regulations because of the collective action nature. But that's a good point. Thank you.
Great. Now I would like to actually, Michelle, no, you don't have to escape, but ask if Katja or Enni wanted to comment on some of this. And Mats has a question, and there's Hannu online asking for the floor. So maybe the other sort of, before we go into the next part of this discussion, is to discuss whether we have the group discussions. Did we have the group discussions? That Riikka Paloniemi, our director from Societal Change, was going to run discussions with us in this. Yeah. So what I will do now is that we will really soon break to the small group discussions, and we come back from them, right? So this will, and also people online have an opportunity to go online. But before that, I would ask if Katja or Enni wanted to still comment on this, what part we should focus on, or what part your approaches help to focus on in the economy. Is it the decoupling? Is it the sort of more behavioral aspects? Is it the structure? Is it the policy, like some boys? If you wanted to comment, or if it's something that I can't guess here. And Enni actually has hand up, so Enni, you can put camera on and say first, and then if Katja wants to comment as well.
Yeah, actually, in the beginning of my presentation, I kind of tried to cover this aspect. So I totally agree with Sampo. In a way, in the current way how we regulate and steer our economy, it's insufficient to reach certain environmental sustainability targets. We have some good examples like European emission trading system and so forth, which have been like recently quite effective in kind of decreasing greenhouse gas emissions and so forth, and making the companies innovate and finding alternative solutions. But But overall, if we think about the economy, we typically quite often support the traditional, the things that we are used to. Like we like to keep the things as they are. So and that is quite often seen in the policy and regulation and in the decision making. But that's something that if we really don't, and if we don't get the incentives in the economy, so the prices, they are really important. Typically, like most of the people and firms, they use those resources, products that are the cheapest. And if these prices are not reflecting the environmental effects, we are never going to see a big systemic changes or sustainability transitions. But that's how I view it. And then one word about the growth. I sometimes feel that we also discuss about the growth in a negative manner, because the growth also gives benefits for us humans and for our society. So that's also it brings improves the living standard, increases employment, strengthens the public finance and so forth, help to reduce poverty and social inequality as well. But of course, still there is the downturn that we kind of overuse the natural capital at the moment, to like we exploit it, and we get some growth. But also the growth could be steered towards to make it more beneficial for the environment, I think. So if the governments, they have more money, they could allocate it more towards environmentally friendly activities and subsidies and so forth. But this is my economist's view speaking. But these were some thoughts that came into my mind while listening to this discussion.
Super, thanks, Amy. And in a way that confirms a lot of what we have heard now, that there's these kind of ways of thinking. Did you, Katja, want to comment on this? Maybe you could come here so the people can see you, and then you are on the mic. And then after that, we take the group discussions. I see a lot of pressure, a lot of hands here. So it's great.
Maybe just briefly, I believe in regulation in a way, that because that also sets different actors, whether they are the companies or consumers, private people, in a way, especially companies in the same, let's say, in the same line. And quite many companies actually wish that, because then there are, well, their circumstances are the same. So I wouldn't trust so much individuals making decisions, no matter, I've said that nothing is as difficult to assume the behavior as a human being. Like, for example, thinking of myself, when I go to a shop, I may go to buy for a liter of milk, and I end up buying something totally different. That's a half joke. But yes, governance, that's important, I think. But of course, understanding also the values, that how do we meet in a new way the expectation that markets have? Because all of us, I think also that we are willing to do the kinds of changes which make our lives easier.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, and that aligns nicely with what Emmy said as well, that there is like a tendency to maintain, and then there is a tendency to believe that the consumer would do something and that actually this needs to be steered. Very nice. It's really nice to see everyone so excited about talking. So now I invite, and I can put the camera on so also people online see who I am as well. I invite Viikki, the director of the Societal Change Unit, to guide us to have a bit of a group discussion so that everyone gets to talk a little bit. Please.
Thank you. And now we are ready to stop our recording. Thank you.
Yeah, this is good point. We stop recording so that we really talk.
Yes, thank you, Mr. and Katja and Enni, for your wonderful presentations.